Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Harrell, and I'll be, along with my colleague Jude Felino, we will be leading this session on Zoom for TAs, leading recitations and office hours. So welcome to everyone. I'm excited to see all of you here joining us on Zoom, which is what we're also going to be talking about a little bit in terms of how you might use this tool to support your students in whatever role you serve as a TA. So actually that's a good place to start. I'd like to just point out that this session is about using Zoom. There will be some things in this session that are pertinent to anyone who's in a teaching role using Zoom. But this one is specifically tailored to some of the unique responsibilities that many TAs may hold. And so if you are an instructor of record, you'll likely take something away from this as well. But this is definitely geared towards TAs. And so if you are an instructor or a faculty member joining us, we also have a Zoom session that's recorded already and you can see on our website. And so you can find that there if you're looking for something more geared toward instructors of record and faculty. Looks like everyone already is keeping their mic muted, and that is one of the things that I wanted to point out before we go through what we'll go over during today's session. If you will keep your mics muted, at various points we might pause for questions, at which point I invite you to use some of the features at Zoom from Zoom that we'll walk through in a moment, and you can use those to kind of let us know that you have a question. But we'll pause at various points to do that. There's a lot of you joining, and that's really one of the best ways to manage some of that. So before we keep going, I'll kind of walk through what we're going to review. We are hoping to have a good amount of time at the end of this session to just go through questions. And so I'll explain kind of where and how you might pose those in just a moment. But today we're going to review getting familiar with Zoom. My colleague Jude, who's co-facilitating this with me, will talk you through how to set up a Zoom meeting. Then we'll talk about sharing your screen. Specifically, we won't talk specifically about PowerPoint slides, but we'll talk about ways that you might share your screen in your role as a TA, whether that's to help students solve problems, using the built-in whiteboard feature, leading a class discussion, things like that. We'll also tell you a little bit about using breakout rooms if you typically use small groups in your recitation or in an office hour session or review session. And then we'll look at using polls and using the waiting room to support potentially office hours as one of a couple different methods for how you might manage office hours, depending on the strategies that you typically use. Right, so let's dive right in. I wanted to also point out that as for this session, Jude and I'm the host, and Jude is the co-host. And in those roles, we have different controls in Zoom that won't be available necessarily to you at this point because you are serving, or you're a participant in this. So you're basically like the students. When you are the host or co-host, you'll have access to additional kind of superpowers within Zoom. And I encourage you, if they haven't already, if you're say sitting in on a lecture course, to encourage the faculty member or the lead instructor for that course to make you co-host so that you have access to those, particularly if they want you to be able to circulate among breakout rooms or some of those other features. But if you are the host, you say you're leading recitation or your own office hours, one good practice is something that we did for this session, which is when we set up the meeting, and Jude will show you how to do this in a minute, we had it where when you all came in, you were automatically muted. A few of you popped in probably from different versions of Zoom or from an iPad or some other way. And I was able, one of the superpower functions, I can mute you. So I was doing that as well. One of the reasons that we encourage you to think about having students enter muted is that any noise in the surrounding area might get picked up by the mic. And if there's some 100 of you in this session, if all of your mics are on, or many of your mics are on, some of that noise could be very distracting. In fact, you might even hear my dog who's downstairs right now and is barking. We're all in unique situations right now. Hopefully you can't hear her, but even just having one mic unmuted while I'm talking, it means that you're going to get some of my background noise. And so ways to kind of mitigate and lessen that is to have everyone, until they're speaking, remain muted. It looks like some of you have figured that out, but if you wanted to mute and unmute yourself, there's a couple ways you can do that. One is the bottom on the desktop version, it's the bottom left-hand corner. There's a little mic button and you can toggle your mic on and off. So if you are working in a small group, you might want to let students know that they can do that they can toggle that option. That way, if they do want to ask a question in a large group or small group, they know how to do that. Of course, as if you're in the host instructor role, you can also toggle that for them. Another way you can do that is if you click on participants. So if you go down, a little menu will pop up at the bottom of your screen and give you an option to click participants. When you do that, you should be able to see, even now, you should be able to see all the participants who are, or students who are in the Zoom class. And so that's a way that you can see everyone who is joining there. You can also, in those same two places, toggle your video on and off. And so that's another function that you have. If you're in a small class or an environment that lends itself to it, inviting your students to keep video on can be really nice for creating like a personal connection with your students and trying to replicate some of that classroom community. But it can also be challenging. So I'd encourage you not to try to require students to use their camera. It requires more bandwidth, more battery life. In some situations, it might be a good idea for students to turn that off. In fact, they might be in a situation where they're in a shared space with others, and that's a way to maintain some of their privacy. And so keeping those things in mind is always important as well. But of course, you can always invite them to, if they're comfortable with that or in a situation where that makes sense, to maintain some of that personal connection. Another thing that you can do that's, again, kind of supports some of that personal connection, but also what'll support some of the ways you might have students engage. So you can have them rename themselves. So if you open that participant window, like I suggested that you could do before, you can actually kind of scroll over your own name in that list. And there's a little blue tab that will open up that you can click that says more, and underneath that it says rename. You can rename yourself. I'd encourage you today to include, if you want to go in there and actually do that, to rename yourself, to include your Andrew ID. And having your students, they can include their preferred name, their pronouns, their Andrew ID, so that you have a better record of who was in attendance. If they've logged in with their CMU ID, then it will come up as a name linked to that. But they may have logged in even accidentally under a personal account, in which case that wouldn't be the case. So you can invite them to do that. And I see some of you are doing that right now. So great, that's really good practice to try that out. A couple other things, and this is includes some of the ways that we'll invite you to engage in this session today, is to use the raised hand and the chat feature if you want to pose a question during today's sestion. And so you can find that raised hand option when you're in the participant window. If you've been working or already kind of trying things out, maybe with other colleagues or instructors that you work with, and you are in the host role, you might not have had that option. So I don't actually have the option right now to raise my hand, but you do. This is another thing. It would be at the bottom of the participant window. And then there's also a yes, no, go slower, go faster options that you can your students can take advantage of as well. You can toggle that hand, you can raise the hand and lower the hand. And in the host role, you can also lower the hands of the students potentially after they have posed their questions. So those are things that they can toggle, you and they can toggle on and off. Another way that you can, and I see some of you trying that out there, that's great. Another way that you can pose a question is in the chat window. So again, this is another button that pops up in that menu if you scroll down, to, kind of move your cursor down to the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you open up that chat, you can type in a question there, and then at various suggest to the students that you'll pause at various points to answer some of those. It can be difficult to read those and try to answer them at the same time that you're also maybe sharing some kind of content or walking through a problem. If you have multiple TAs working together in a recitation, you could have somebody monitor the chat while someone else is facilitating. If you're sitting in on a lecture with the instructor of record, the primary professor of a course, you might be asked to be that monitor, the person that's monitoring the chat and answering some of those questions that come up, or signaling to the professor somehow that there is a question that needs to be answered. And so we'll be using a strategy where you might see me or one of my colleagues answer some of the questions that come up in chat. But we also will take some pauses and address some of those verbally as we go through today's session. All right, I want to keep moving, and I will take a look at the chat while I hand things off to Jude, my colleague, who's going to walk you through how you will actually go about initially setting up a Zoom session. And you can do this whether you're leading a recitation section or you are setting up office hours or other things. We'll walk you through some of the options that might be pertinent to you given different roles that you might hold. All right, Jude?
Hello, everyone. So today we are using the desktop app to share our screens and present to you all. And that is the recommended way to host a meeting. But one thing we like to do at the Eberly Center, and I think it's a good practice, is to actually schedule your meetings through the web app. So you can do this on Canvas, or you can go to cmu.zoom.us as I'm doing now. And I'm going to click on sign in. And over here, you're going to land on your profile tab. What I'm going to do is go to meetings to schedule a meeting. Here you'll see a list of all of my meetings. I can click on previous meetings, and I can go to my personal meeting room as well. But I'm going to schedule a new meeting. And I'm going to just give this topic name. So I could say, and potentially give a description. It's not necessary or not needed, as long as you have your topic name. You can set your date. So my meeting, I'll say, will be next Monday at 12 p.m. And I'm going to leave it for about an hour, but you can change it in 15-minute intervals. My time zone is going to stay the same since I'm still at CMU's campus. And I can set this as a recurring meeting if I want to. So if it's going to be every Monday, I can make the recurrence weekly. I could also set if it's going to be on a Thursday as well, or whatever day you wish. And then I can change the end date. I'm going to leave some of these blank, registration and meeting password, but I'm also going to keep the video off and the participant off. I can always toggle this when the meeting is actually taking place. For audio, I'm saying both for joining, and for meeting options, this is probably more important for all of us. I'm going to leave enable join before host, but if this is office hours, you may also want to enable the waiting room. I'll talk about this a little bit more later on. I also would suggest to mute participants on entry. And if you want to record the meeting, you can record it here with record automatically. We're suggesting to record to the cloud. That way you can have a URL link that you can paste into Canvas that students can look at after. Okay. If you do have another TA you were going to co-facilitate with or an instructor, you can add an alternative host right here. I'm going to give this one look over. Everything looks okay. And I'm going to click save. And now I have the option to copy this URL or add this to my Google Calendar. If everything looks good and the time started, I can click start this meeting as well. And because this meeting is created, I can now create a poll. So it's important to note that only the original meeting host, so if the person who set this up, can edit or add polls during a meeting. If the host or co-host role is transferred to another user, then any poll that has been created previously will be able to be launched by that user. So in this saved meeting, I have a poll. I'm going to scroll down to the poll option and create one. And these are your options. So you can enter the title of this poll. I'm going to say right now, I don't like working remotely, but this is what the poll is for. I can make this, enable this to be anonymous, so your student responses aren't tracked to who said what. And here I can type my question. In this case, I'll just copy and paste. And I can choose between single choice or multiple choice. Single choice means they can only choose one answer. Multiple choice means they can click multiple answers. It's a little bit of a misnomer, but that's how they chose their wordage. If I want to add another question, I can. Or if I just want to save, I'll click save. So now that poll is attached to my meeting. Okay.
Jude, we also had a question from someone about when you save a video on the cloud, where does the video get saved? Can you show us that?
So let's see if I have anything recorded. So I'm under cmu.zoom.us, signed into my profile, and I'm on this recordings tab. I do have one. So it'll be on recordings tab. It'll say cloud recordings, and it'll be right here. It will show me my file size as well and how many files I have. And if I click share, I have these options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you also should get an email, and Meg noted this in the chat for us, but you should also get an email letting you know that the recording is ready to go.
Yes. It can take some time for it to be processed and put into your account as well. So be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone just reported to us that it can take anywhere from 1 hour to 12.
Yes.
It can take quite a while. So just be prepared for that. Prasoon, did you have another question, or I see that was the question, or you were the one that posed the question in chat as well?
Hi, yeah, that was me. I just had a question on where the video gets saved. Yeah, that was me on the chat as well. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And then we also have another one. Is it possible to add participants, students, or should we only share the link on Canvas?
If it is for a class, I would only share the link on Canvas for your particular students.
So just putting it in Canvas is the best way to go?
Correct.
Great. And what's the purpose of setting up a poll, and will it show up before or after the meeting? We're going to run a poll in a bit here just so you can see what that looks like. A poll is a great way that you might engage students. Maybe you want to, just like kind of similar to using clickers in the classroom or poll everywhere in a live classroom, if you've done anything like that or worked with someone who did that. It might be not be something that you want to do. If you want to just pose a simple yes or no question to your students, you may have noticed in that participant window, you can click in a yes or a no. And so that would be a much simpler way to do a poll of your students, like, are you with me? Are you not with me? And having them signal that. But if you wanted to ask a more complicated or multiple choice type question so that they can kind of cue in their answers, and then you can find out kind of where students are, whether they understand something or not, then a poll might be something that you want to leverage. Then we also had one other, and then we're going to move on for now, but we'll take a pause for other questions in a few minutes. Is it possible to show two different screens at the same time? One from notes in iPad, for instance, and another from my computer. Jude, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I've not done that. I'm not sure if you can, how easy it is to use. So we can get back to you on that one.
Great. All right, so we will continue on, but keep posing your questions in the chat and we'll get back to those. And then of course, Meg is another one of our colleagues who's in on the call. So if she answers your question, she's someone who knows her stuff. And then me or Jude may also, depending on who's talking at any given point. So keep asking your questions and we'll take another pause in a couple minutes to respond to more of those. So we wanted to walk through a couple other features of Zoom. One to think about, like maybe you want to share something with your students. You want to walk through a problem set, for example, or you typically write on the whiteboard or the chalkboard in your classroom. Or maybe you even share PowerPoint slides in your recitation or something like that. You can use Zoom's screen share feature to share your screen with students. And you can connect a tablet or work from a tablet, and there are ways that you can annotate on the screen for your students, but you don't actually need any special technology to do that. You can do that directly from your computer. You have those annotation options. You may have noticed that Jude has been underlining or circling different areas of the screen that we're sharing. This is even just from a simple PowerPoint. You can annotate right on top of that. It can be a little bit clunky to write on your computer this way. So a couple other strategies that we have either heard from other people or have been kind of brainstorming different ways to do this. One is that you can use your phone as a document camera. So maybe you can if you have a way to hold that up, you can share things that way. Another, which is even more potentially simpler, would be to write out the things that you plan to write. You would write on the chalkboard or the whiteboard for your students. Take a screenshot or a picture of that, save that as a PDF or something that you can display as the thing that you're showing on Zoom. And then you can use the clunkier Zoom annotation tool to point out different areas of that at different points. So that you're kind of highlighting or directing their attention to different things. We recognize that this isn't going to emulate perfectly what happens in the classroom, but there are advantages to these kinds of strategies. For instance, those things that you've written out now can become artifacts for your students that you could share with them after the fact or even before class for them to use to take their own notes as well. If you are kind of walking through maybe a problem that you're solving, whether you're doing that on the whiteboard feature or through a slide or through some other document that you're sharing and maybe typing into as the students are going, keep in mind that you can also, even in Zoom, give students the opportunity to participate in some of that. Maybe you could ask for volunteers or nominate a student to narrate some of the steps. Again, keeping in mind that you have some control over muting and unmuting them, as well as reminding them that they can unmute themselves if you've invited them to share. If you've had them rename themselves, even if they don't have their video on, you can't see their face, you likely still see their name there and can call on different students at various points to participate in some of that. If you are not someone who typically writes on a whiteboard or works through problem sets, maybe you're someone who facilitates discussions in your recitation section or with your students in office hours where you run different discussions. You can do a full group discussion with Zoom. We have 131 people joining us right now, and so that would be pretty difficult. If you have more like 8 to 10 participants in Zoom, you could have most of or many of the students unmute themselves as during part of that discussion. But even then, we would encourage you to use that or have your students use the raised hand or the chat box feature. And letting them know in advance through kind of establishing guidelines as a group which strategy you will use, or if you'll use both at various points, can be helpful so that they aren't raising their hand and you're not monitoring that. If you're not going to monitor that and prefer that they type their responses into the chat box, letting them know that in advance. So kind of setting up your own protocol for how that that class discussion will run, so that everyone has an opportunity to participate and you are engaged with them in that. You can, of course, have them participating in that and recording ideas on a whiteboard. You can even type responses into the whiteboard. You don't have to hand write those onto the computer screen if they are using traditional keyboards. Another thing that you might keep in mind is there is also under, I believe it's under there's somewhere you should see viewing options. It looks different depending on which version of Zoom you're using, but you can use the view option to go to gallery view. And in gallery view, you'll see more of the video feeds or names of the students in that other kind of view where they're all in boxes. And this can be helpful if you're having a large group discussion and you want everyone to be able to see more of the people who are participating and contributing to that conversation. Whichever of these kind of full group strategies you might use, you'll want to also consider how you're going to engage students in that online space. So pausing strategically to address those questions if you don't have the support of someone who can monitor the chat for you. Maybe even having a student who's monitoring that chat with you for you, so that you're who's the only one nominated to be unmuted to let you know when questions arise. That could be a way to mitigate that if you don't have the support of a second TA or another person on the instructor team. You can also use the live poll feature that we mentioned earlier and showed you how to set up to engage students. So I made an example poll. It's nothing all that exciting. It just has to do with the TA responsibilities that you might hold. And I just deployed it. Hopefully you can see that and you can key in your responses. I see lots coming in. I'll give you about 15 more seconds to add in your response there. And as we move forward, and then I'll show you the results of that poll. But you can also pause, pausing to check in with your students and just check in whether they are following or not can also be helpful, and ask them to use the thumbs up or thumbs down, which is in that participant window under more, or the yes and no. Those are other ways that you might engage with them on that. And you could also put if you are, say, using a broad discussion prompt, you can also record that in the chat window so that it's there for everyone to see, just like you might maybe write it on the whiteboard or post that on a PowerPoint. So thank you for contributing to the poll. I can share the results with you even to see. We have a lot of people here who hold office hours and many who lead recitations or meet with students one-on-one. That doesn't surprise me. I expected that many of you would be in those positions, but we also have quite a few who are in the other category or facilitating studios or meeting with student teams. And these are all different, all things that Zoom can support. If you're meeting with student teams, you want to meet with all your teams at once, this next feature that I'm going to share would be ideal for you, where you can move students into breakout rooms. If you're facilitating a studio, you can set it up really similarly, but just with a smaller group. And we'd be happy to talk to you about some of the specifics that might come up with running a studio. So I'm going to stop sharing these results, but thank you so much for participating in our poll. I did see a question pop up about, can you create polls on the fly? My understanding is that you can do that. I will say from experience that I found it, I had to make sure that I had the most up-to-date version of Zoom. So if you're using the desktop app, make sure that you update that. Maybe even restart that so that you can you get that option to create polls in the moment. Do you want to add anything to that, or does that sound accurate to you?
Yeah, that sounds accurate for me, especially on mine. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, there's one main more feature, and then I want to talk a little bit about office hours, and then we'll open it up to any of the remaining questions that have not been addressed yet. So this next one is if you typically have students work in small groups, or you're managing those team projects in your role. You could also use this next strategy if you are hosting office hours and want to have a group work with groups of students, or have students in that kind of maybe work on different problems at different times. And we'll talk a little more about office hours after I talk about the breakout rooms. So another feature, you won't see this option right now because you are all participants in this meeting, but you can also move students into what is called breakout rooms. In breakout rooms, you can assign as many rooms as you want. Zoom will automatically tell you how many students approximately will end up in those rooms. So if you say, I want to create 10, right now it would tell me that it'll group you in groups of 12 or 13. And so it will do that calculation for you, and you can increase the number of groups until you have the size of groups that you want. Only the host can create breakout rooms. So if you're leading recitation or a discussion section and you're the one who has set up the recurring class session in Zoom, then you should be able to create the breakout rooms. If you're a TA who's attending lecture and the faculty member wants to use breakout rooms and have you circulate, as long as you're a co-host or an alternative host, you can circulate among the breakout rooms. You just won't be able to create them. In those breakout rooms, each group will have their own whiteboard. They can also click a button to ask for help from you or the instructor or other people who are on the team and host or co-host. So they can do that. And you can also send a call out to everyone, letting them know maybe that when they have 5 minutes left, or reminding them of aspects of the prompt. Keep in mind that just is a kind of blurb that flashes up at the top of the screen when they're in the breakout room. So you might want to remind them of anything if it was an important, maybe something came up in one that you wanted everyone to know about. It would still be good to remind them of that when you all get to the back to the main session. When you have them return to the main session, it usually will give them a 60-second prompt, 60 seconds left, and you'll want to wait until they all return so that everyone is in that same space. They'll have a little bit of time to wrap up their final notes before it forces them back into the main Zoom session. We're not going to practice moving you into Zoom groups because I want to have plenty of time into breakout rooms here because there are a lot of you. And we want to make sure we have time for Q&A. But I would encourage you to work with your colleagues to try it out to see some of the functionality that you have when you move students into breakout rooms. Right, the last piece that we wanted to talk through is office hours. And we have a few different options, and I'm going to hand off things at various points to Jude to walk you through some of the how-to associated with some of these options. But they all depend on how you typically run your office hours and what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're doing small groups or one-on-one, one way that you can do that is when you set up Zoom, you can enable what is called a waiting room feature so that you can invite a certain number of students or one student at a time into the Zoom call rather than having them all present at once. So Jude, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So on your screen right now is what would happen if you are conducting a live session that you have enabled waiting rooms through what we were doing earlier when setting up a Zoom meeting. If you were to click on Manage Participants and you have a waiting room present, they wouldn't actually be in the main session. They'll be in a waiting room, and you'll see this notice here, X number of people are waiting, right? In this instance, there are 2 people waiting. If I want to bring them in one by one, I would just click the Admit button next to their name. Or if I wanted all of them in at the same time, I can click Admit All. And if I want to take a step back, I can change those settings under the Manage Participants area as well to say put attendee in waiting room on entry. So none of them will actually be in the main room unless you want them to, which would be the slide before. Okay.
Yeah, and Jude, if you can leave that on
Sure.
slide up for just a moment. Someone else earlier asked, we're returning to something previously, but asked about the button for creating breakout rooms, and next, actually, you can see it on this page where it's all the way to, yeah, right there. And you'll only have that option when you are the host to click on that and create those, but that's what it will look like. All right, did you have anything else on the waiting room?
That's it for waiting rooms. It's just remember you have to set it up beforehand when you're creating your meeting.
Oh yeah, the waiting room. Sorry,
Yes,
I got distracted with breakout rooms. So yeah, the waiting room. Nope, we're good. Another way that you might run around office hours is maybe you have a lot of people that you want to invite into a room together. And you can either do that just like we are right now, except where students are raising the hands and asking questions verbally. But potentially you might want to be able to kind of navigate a couple different, maybe there's multiple TAs and you want to be able to navigate multiple questions at once. And you could even just use the chat in Zoom to answer questions. Or for open time for questions, just very similar to what we've been doing here. One of the advantages to that, or one way that you can kind of maybe even leverage that strategy, is also saving the chat. So again, when you're the host, you'll have the option to, before you close out the meeting, to save the chat from that has occurred during the meeting. And then you could even share some of that, especially if it's been, a lot of questions that you think other students who may not have been able to join synchronously. Perhaps you have students who are in drastically different time zones. Maybe you're in a drastically different time zone. And there are other reasons that you want to be able to make that available to students who weren't able to join for office hours. And so you could leverage that that way. Another strategy might be to use maybe a combination of those two strategies. Again, thinking about students who may or may not be present in the Eastern time zone, or might have had or have been having technology issues in terms of logging in for live sessions. And so we may be leveraging multiple technologies, maybe having them post questions to a Canvas discussion board, or somewhere else that's shared Piazza, and then using the Zoom, the live session to answer questions that students bring in the moment, bring synchronously, but also recording answers to those other questions that students can all access later. Did you want to add anything to that one in terms of kind of other tools that might support that collecting questions in advance?
Yeah, just to add to what you were saying is, I would post that video of your recording if you're using the Canvas discussion board on that discussion board itself, just through the edit function instead of as a reply to your original post. I think that'd be a simple way for your students to be able to immediately see and get to what the answers they're looking for. But if you're already using another discussion-based platform like Piazza, you can set a couple hours where you're monitoring and answering in real time. Students can post beforehand and think about what they're thinking, or thinking about what questions they're having, and maybe have an involved question for you to answer. And then you'll be able to answer it at a set time. Canvas also offers a chat function that you can enable. I would strongly encourage, again, to use certain established hours, keeping in mind that students can post whatever they want, so they can go off topic. It is worth noting, however, that instructors and TAs have the ability to delete certain posts, but those students do not. So when they post, they should be practicing proper etiquette.
Yeah, so this might be a good opportunity, just like we've been talking a little bit about, to providing guidelines in Zoom, letting them know how you're going to use the raise hand feature, the chat, but also reminding them of some of the etiquette that is called for in these online spaces that they may not have used to this degree or in this way in the past. another way that you might be thinking about setting up office hours would be I know some of you even on our poll mentioned that you plan to be working one-on-one with students, whether that's in office hours or in other ways. And so using things like your calendar through Canvas, of course, email and other ways to set up specific hours. You can certainly have one-on-one meetings. I've been doing it a lot lately through Zoom. So you don't have to use Zoom just for large group meetings like the one we're having right now, but you can use Zoom to have face-to-face, virtually face-to-face one-on-one meetings with your students as well. You could even enable the waiting room and use one meeting, one meeting link if you're going to have a series of those one-on-one meetings where they arrive at their appointed time and you let them in as you finish with previous students. All right. Jude, did you want to add anything else for any of these before we just jump into some Q&A?
I think we pretty much covered it. I'm sure the questions will come up both in this meeting and as you start participating with your students. So feel free to send us an email at Eberly-Assist if you have any questions.
Great. I do want to note we're going to take Q&A now. Because Meg has been doing such a great job of responding to many of the questions in the chat, I don't know which ones have been answered and which ones haven't. So I'm going to invite you all, if you still have a question, we absolutely want to answer that, but I'll invite you to use that raised hand button, and I will call on those that raised to the top, and we'll verbally answer or ask your questions so that we can address that. When you do that, keep in mind that I'll probably lower your hand if you don't. And also don't forget to unmute yourself so that when you ask your question. So we'll pause and let you think about that. And then we'll start addressing any of the other questions that you have. So Hun, you had a question. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
I have a question about the waiting room. So if I admit a student from the waiting room into the main room, and if discussion is finished, should I ask for the student to leave, or so if students leave the main room, then does he go to the waiting room, or I'm thinking about the process, because in the office hours I talk to one student and another student, and
you move around between students. Yeah. So I would say this might be one of those things, and I'll invite Jude or Meg in the chat to respond to this as well. But I think keeping in mind what makes sense for you and your students. If they have private questions, maybe you could invite them to while they're in the room to present those in the chat. They can actually, if you kind of look in your chat window, there's a button that says everyone. But if you click on that, you can actually send a private message to anyone else, because we have the settings set where you can do that. So they could ask if it was something they really didn't want other people to hear. But you could invite them, so many students in at once to talk, maybe 3 or 4 at a time, depending on what the size of the waiting room is. You could manage that in a way you wanted. If it's things that might benefit the other students, questions that they have, maybe it's okay to have a few in the room at one time. I'm not sure logistically, Jude, if a student, after they've been in the room, would they get booted back to the waiting room? Can that happen as well?
Depending on your settings, you can move them from the waiting room and back and forth. It might be unwieldy if you have a lot of students.
Okay.
But that is certainly an ability.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Jack.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So similar to Hoon's question, we often, sometimes if the queues in office hours get very large, we'll have another TA come in to help out in clearing the queue. Is there a way using the waiting room feature that we can have, multiple TAs helping different students at the same time in the same Zoom session?
Yeah, I would suggest using the breakout rooms if you end up splitting into two groups.
Okay.
Yeah, Jude, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, no, I was going to say breakout rooms I think would work pretty well for that because then you could even, depending on how students join, if they're using the mobile app or the desktop app, you could use the general room as your meeting room and then bring students in and out of that general room to your breakout rooms. I think there's a couple ways to do it. It's just practice and what you are most comfortable with.
Okay. And so if there are breakout rooms with also the waiting room, um, if a student is in a breakout room, can they also be in the waiting room? Like, does it partition people into, waiting rooms for different breakout rooms, or is that not, am I misunderstanding it?
No, so everyone's in a waiting room before the session starts,
Okay.
and then they're in the main room, and then they're pushed into a breakout room.
Got
So
it.
it's,
Okay.
it's a tiered response.
Okay. Awesome. That makes sense. Thank you.
Great. If you are planning to use breakout rooms in that way or in another way, I would highly encourage, if you have colleagues who are also interested in doing that, kind of anyone can set up a Zoom room, and you can do that too, or a Zoom meeting, and playing around with that to see what options you have. I did it earlier for a different webinar, and just the functionality of moving people around, moving students around, assigning them to different breakout rooms. Took a little practice. So I highly recommend kind of getting in there and trying it out, so that you know what your options are. It's not difficult, but it can be new and figuring out where buttons are. So I highly encourage you to join together with some other, maybe your TA team or other, maybe even students who are willing to practice that as well, to get a feel for how it goes. Honey, if you had a question.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Go for it.
sorry. For office hours or something similar, do you have a recommended app or add-on where all the students and the instructor can just have like some kind of drawing canvas to act as some kind of whiteboard everybody can work on? Like I'm trying to avoid, specifically I'm trying to avoid the annotate function on Zoom because it seems a bit clunky.
Jude, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have any designated annotation or whiteboard. Do you could make a shared Google Doc and they could type and comment that way. But that might be unwieldy depending on how large your class is.
Sorry, just to follow up, I think it's because of the way that what we have to do. I would much prefer if we have like a drawing function, which is like something that Google Docs is very bad at. Like, is there something more catered to it that case?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, this might be one of, so it sounds like you want to be able to write with a little more kind of clarity, but handwriting, drawing, making diagrams, different things like that. Is that true, Hanif? So if that's the case, I would suggest, you can, if you have access to a tablet, that makes that a little more seamless. I see actually a couple people in the chat also suggesting that there might be other apps you might use. Meg even says that there is a whiteboard, that using the whiteboard and annotate then actually just would mean drawing on the whiteboard. So that's the built-in function. But you could also, if you know what those things are going to be in advance, you might consider, this is the strategy where you write on a piece of paper, take a picture of that, and then use those more clunky annotation tools to direct attention to different parts of what you drew in advance. Jude, were you going to say anything else or different?
Nope.
Okay. Great. I saw another question and I was just about to call on you and it disappeared. So I'm not sure who that was, but please raise your hand again if you wanted to pose a question. Are there other questions that you would like to pose? All right, we can stick around for a couple more minutes, but that's all the content that we had to share. If there are other questions that you have, please continue to type those into chat, or again, Jude and I will stick around for a couple more minutes. to answer any others that have come up. But thank you so much for joining us today. Keep in mind that we have, we're constantly adding more resources to this website here, cmu.edu/teaching/online. And if you have specific questions or concerns that aren't addressed there, we'd certainly encourage you to go there first, work with the rest of your instructor team. But if there are, you're having issues that you need support with, please let us know at eberly-assist@andrew.cmu.edu.